I want to tell you something that changed everything for me, and I believe it's going to change everything for you too. There's a secret hidden in plain sight, tucked away in the most ancient of texts, and for decades, I've watched it transform desperate situations into absolute miracles. The 23rd Psalm isn't what you think it is. It isn't just a prayer. It's a wealth code, a prosperity blueprint, a metaphysical map to abundance that's been sitting right in front of humanity for thousands of years, and almost everyone has missed it completely. Right now, as we stand at the threshold of 2026, you're being called to something greater. I know you feel it. That restlessness, that knowing that there's more available to you than what you're currently experiencing. You're here because your soul recognizes truth when it hears it. And darling, what I'm about to share with you isn't theory. This is tested. This is proven. This is the spiritual law that I've seen turn poverty into prosperity, lack into abundance, and fear into absolute faith so many times that I stopped counting years ago. Let me be direct with you, because your time is precious, and so is mine. You don't have a money problem. You never did. What you have is a consciousness problem. What you have is a vision problem. And the 23rd Psalm, when understood through the metaphysical lens, when decoded properly, becomes the most powerful prosperity tool you will ever encounter. It rewrites your entire relationship with supply. It restructures how you see yourself in relation to abundance. And most importantly, it activates something dormant inside you, something that's been waiting for this exact moment to wake up. I've worked with people who had $3 to their name. I've sat across from women who didn't know how they'd feed their children the next day. I've counseled men who'd lost everything and were contemplating ending it all. And I've watched, with my own eyes, as this ancient wisdom, this hidden code, turned their entire reality inside out. Not in years, not in months, sometimes in days, sometimes overnight. Because this isn't about working harder. This is about aligning with a spiritual law that's been operating since the beginning of time, whether you believed in it or not. The universe doesn't care about your doubt. It only responds to your word, your consciousness, your inner conviction. And the 23rd Psalm is the master class in speaking the language that the universe understands. So settle in, because what I'm about to walk you through is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about God, about money, about worthiness, and about what's actually available to you right now, in this very moment. Are you ready? Because once you see this, you can't unsee it. And once you activate this code, your life will never be the same again. Now, let me take you back to a moment when I first discovered what I'm about to share with you. I was sitting in my study, and I'd been working with a woman, let's call her Margaret, who came to me absolutely devastated. She'd been a widow for 6 months, and her late husband had left her with nothing but debt. The creditors were circling. She had 2 children to feed, and she looked at me with these hollow eyes and said something I'll never forget. She said, "Florence, I've prayed and prayed the 23rd Psalm every single night since I was a child. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, but I want for everything. Where is this shepherd? Where is this provision? I feel completely abandoned." And in that moment, something crystallized for me. She'd been reciting words without understanding the power contained within them. She'd been speaking poetry without activating the metaphysical principle. She was like someone holding a winning lottery ticket but never cashing it in because she didn't realize what she was holding. And darling, that's most of humanity. Walking around with the master key to infinite supply, reciting it, framing it, memorizing it, but never actually using it to unlock the door. Now, here's where it gets fascinating. The power isn't in the word itself, it's in the conviction, the feeling, the absolute knowing behind the word. You see, words are just vessels, empty containers. It's your faith, your consciousness, your unwavering belief that fills them with creative fire. I've watched people speak the most beautiful affirmations with their lips while their hearts were screaming doubt. And do you know what manifested? The doubt. Every single time. Because the universe doesn't respond to your words, darling, it responds to your consciousness. It's like trying to fool a mirror. You can smile at it while feeling miserable inside, but the mirror still shows your eyes, doesn't it? Still reveals the truth. The word must become flesh. That's not just scripture, that's metaphysical law. Your word must take on the substance of belief, must be clothed in the garment of faith, must walk around in your consciousness as an absolute certainty before it can manifest in your world. I knew a businessman once, brilliant man, who kept affirming, "I am prosperous, money flows to me easily," said it morning, noon, and night. But every time a bill arrived, his stomach clenched. Every time he checked his bank account, anxiety rippled through him. Every time someone mentioned money, he felt that old familiar fear creeping up his spine. His words said prosperity, but his consciousness screamed poverty. And guess which one won? The universe isn't deaf, but it doesn't listen to your mouth, it listens to your heart. This is why I tell people, one moment of absolute conviction is worth more than 1,000 repetitions of hollow words. One flash of pure knowing will move mountains faster than years of fearful hoping. The woman who can look at an empty bank account and feel genuinely grateful for the abundance that's on its way, not pretending, not performing, but actually feeling it in her bones, that woman has cracked the code. I'll tell you about something that happened just last week. A young man came to me, desperate, clutching a pile of bills he couldn't pay. "But I'm saying my affirmations every day," he insisted, showing me his little notebook where he'd written "I am prosperous" 50 times each morning. And I looked at him and said, "Darling, you're not affirming prosperity, you're affirming your fear of poverty. Every time you write those words, you're thinking about the bills, aren't you?" He went pale. Because it was true. This is the trap, you see. We think we're being spiritual when we're actually reinforcing the very thing we're trying to escape. We say, "I am wealthy," while our stomach is in knots about the rent. We declare, "I am loved," while scanning our phone every 5 minutes to see if they texted back. We're not planting seeds, we're just rearranging the weeds. Real manifestation doesn't feel like effort, it feels like relief. It feels like coming home. When you've truly aligned with your desire, there's a sense of completion before anything has even changed in the physical world. This is what the mystics mean when they talk about the Sabbath. It's not a day of the week. It's a state of rest in the absolute certainty that it is done. I've watched people transform their entire lives in weeks once they grasped this. Not because they worked harder at their affirmations, but because they stopped working altogether. They stopped trying to convince themselves and simply decided. That's the word I want you to remember. Decided. Not hoped, not wished, not tried. Decided. The universe doesn't respond to your words or even your feelings, really. It responds to your assumptions, to what you're taking for granted about yourself and your life. Show me someone who assumes they're lucky, and I'll show you someone who experiences coincidence after coincidence. Show me someone who assumes people are kind, and watch how kindness follows them like a shadow. This is why I tell you, stop trying to change your circumstances. Stop pushing against what is. Instead, change the thing you're assuming to be true about yourself and your world, because that's what's creating the circumstances in the first place. I know this sounds backwards. You're thinking, but I'll believe it when I see it. And that's exactly the trap. You've got the whole thing reversed. You'll see it when you believe it. You'll see it when you assume it's already true. Let me give you something concrete. Say you want more money. Most people approach this by looking at their bank account, feeling the lack, and then trying to manifest abundance while simultaneously assuming they're broke. Do you see the contradiction? They're standing in the assumption of poverty while reaching for wealth. It doesn't work that way. What you need to do is live from the assumption that you are financially secure, not that you will be that you already are. When you truly assume something, you don't obsess over it. You don't check constantly to see if it's real. You just take it for granted, the way you take for granted that the sun will rise tomorrow. People who are naturally wealthy don't sit around thinking about money all day. They assume it's handled. They assume opportunities come to them. They assume they're taken care of. And because they assume it, they act accordingly. They make different choices. They see different possibilities. They literally inhabit a different reality than someone who assumes scarcity. This is what I mean by living in the end. You're not pretending. You're not lying to yourself. You're stepping into the assumption that what you want is already accomplished, already done. And from that place, you move through your day. The old you would have said, "I hope this works out." The new you says nothing because you already know it's handled. The old you would have been anxious, checking, forcing. The new you is calm, expectant, open. Can you feel the difference? That's not just a mood shift. That's a shift in your fundamental assumption about reality itself. And here's what nobody tells you. This takes courage. Real courage. Because you're going to be standing in an assumption that contradicts what your eyes are showing you. Your bills will say one thing, your assumption has to say another. Your relationship looks one way, your assumption has to hold firm to a different truth. And this is where most people break. They start strong. They feel the excitement of this new awareness. They declare their new assumption with conviction. But then 3 days pass, 5 days, a week, and the outer world hasn't shifted yet, and they start to waver. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this doesn't work. Maybe I'm the exception. And right there, they abandon the assumption and slip back into the old pattern. And the universe, always loyal, always responsive, says, "Your wish is my command." Back to the old pattern we go. But here's what changes everything. Understanding that there is a lag. The outer world is not instant. It's a delayed mirror. It's reflecting back what you assumed yesterday, last week, last month. So when you plant a new assumption today, you will not see it bloom tomorrow morning. But that doesn't mean it's not working. Think of it like planting a seed. You don't dig it up every day to check if it's growing. You trust the process. You water it. You tend to it. You assume the seed is doing exactly what seeds do beneath the surface. Your assumption is the same. You hold it. You return to it. You live from it, even when circumstances scream otherwise. Especially when circumstances scream otherwise. Because those circumstances, they're the old crop. They're last season's harvest. They have nothing to do with what you're planting now. And I promise you this. If you can hold an assumption long enough for it to harden into fact, if you can persist in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, even when logic argues against you, the outer world will reorganize itself to match. Not because you forced it, not because you manipulated anything, but because you changed the inner cause. An effect has no choice but to follow. This is law. This is how creation works. You are not asking the universe for permission. You are not begging life to make an exception for you. You are stepping into your role as creator and saying, "This is the truth I am now assuming. This is the state I am occupying, and I will not be moved." This is why the silent work is so powerful. It is not passive waiting, it is active alignment. When you remain steady in your knowing, when you refuse to let the outer facts dictate your inner state, you are doing the most important work there is. I have seen people turn their entire lives around, not through frantic effort, but through quiet, unwavering assumption. They stopped arguing with reality. They stopped defending their old story. They simply began to embody the version of themselves who already had what they desired. And here's what happens when you do this. The universe has no choice but to reflect it back to you. Because consciousness is the only reality. What you are conscious of being, you must experience. This is law. Now, I know what you might be thinking. But Florence, I've tried this before. I've affirmed. I've visualized. And nothing changed. And I want you to hear me clearly on this. If nothing changed, it is because you were still divided. You were affirming one thing with your words, while assuming another with your consciousness. You were saying, "I am wealthy," while still feeling poor. You were declaring, "I am loved," while still believing yourself unworthy. And the universe does not respond to your words. It responds to your state of being. This is why so many manifestation techniques fail. They focus on doing, when the real work is being. You do not need to do more. You need to become more aligned, more conscious, more deliberate in what you are assuming to be true. Let me give you an example. A woman once came to me in despair. She had been trying to manifest a specific sum of money for months. She had written it down, repeated affirmations, created vision boards, and yet nothing had appeared. She felt defeated, like the universe had abandoned her. I asked her one question. "When you think of this money, what do you feel?" And she paused. Then she said, "I feel anxious. I feel like I need it desperately. I feel afraid of what will happen if it doesn't come." There it was. She was not assuming wealth. She was assuming lack. Her every thought about the money reinforced the very state she was trying to escape. And so the universe, ever faithful, continued to give her more experiences of needing, more reasons to feel anxious. This is the nature of mental law. It cannot give you what you want. It can only give you what you are. I want you to understand this deeply. You can spend your entire life wanting something with every fiber of your being, yet never receive it, because wanting and having exist in two different vibrational states. Wanting is the consciousness of lack. Having is the consciousness of possession. The universe doesn't respond to your words or your pleading. It responds to your assumption, to the state of being you occupy most consistently. Think of the man who constantly affirms, "I am prosperous. I am prosperous," while his stomach churns with anxiety every time a bill arrives in the mail. His words say prosperity, but his feeling tone screams poverty. Which do you think the universe hears? The universe has no ears for your words. It has only a mirror for your consciousness. I knew a woman once who desperately wanted to marry. She prayed, she visualized, she made lists of the qualities she desired in a husband. Yet year after year, she remained alone. When I spoke with her, I discovered something fascinating. Every time she pictured her wedding day, she felt a tight clench of anxiety in her chest. Her inner voice whispered, "But what if it never happens? What if I'm not worthy? What if all the good men are taken?" She was not truly seeing herself married. She was rehearsing disappointment. She was practicing the feeling of being passed over, and the universe, reading her frequency perfectly, continued to pass her over. I told her what I'm telling you now. You must stop wanting and start accepting. You must cease your begging and claim your inheritance. The kingdom of heaven, which is simply the realm of fulfilled desire, is not reached through petition, but through assumption. There is a vast difference between "I want to be healthy" and "I am health itself." One is reaching towards something outside yourself. The other is claiming dominion from within. One makes you a beggar at the feast. The other seats you at the head of the table. Your consciousness is your only reality. Everything you experience in the outer world is simply the shadow it casts. Change the consciousness, and the shadow must follow. But here's where most people trip themselves up. They try to change the shadow directly. They push against circumstances, fight conditions, wrestle with effects. It's like standing in front of a mirror, furiously rubbing at your reflection, wondering why your actual face won't come clean. You cannot change the reflection by attacking the glass. You must turn around and wash your face. This is why affirmations fail for so many. They're standing in lack, feeling the poverty, tasting the bitterness of limitation, and they're shouting words of abundance into the mirror. But the consciousness hasn't shifted. They're still identified with the old state. The words are just noise bouncing off the surface of their unchanged awareness. True manifestation, what Neville called assuming the wish fulfilled, requires something far more subtle and infinitely more powerful. It requires you to actually become the person who already has it, not pretend. Not hope, not wish. Asterisk. Become. Asterisk. And this is not acting. This is not walking around in expensive clothes you can't afford, faking confidence you don't feel. That's still operating from lack, just dressed up in a costume. No, I'm talking about an inner shift so complete that the question of when will it come simply doesn't arise anymore. Think about something you already have. Maybe it's a roof over your head. Maybe it's a friend who loves you. Maybe it's the ability to read these words right now. Do you spend your days anxiously wondering if you have it? Do you repeat affirmations to convince yourself it exists? Do you visualize it obsessively, hoping it will appear? No, of course not. You simply know you have it. That knowing is effortless. It doesn't require maintenance or proof, it's just done. That consciousness of already having it that's the secret. When you can rest in that same inner knowing about the thing you desire, when you can feel the naturalness of it, the inevitability of it, without any strain or reaching, the outer world has no choice but to conform. Now, I want you to understand something that might sound paradoxical at first. Asterisk. The very act of trying hard actually pushes your good away from you. Asterisk. Think about it. When you're straining, when you're anxious, when you're desperately working and worrying, what are you really saying to the universe? You're saying, "I don't have this. I'm separate from it. It's far away from me, and I must somehow bridge this terrible gap through my own limited human effort." That's a declaration of lack. And the law of mind, remember, it's absolutely impersonal, simply responds to your declaration. It says, yes, you're right, you don't have it. Here's more evidence of your not having it. I've watched people exhaust themselves, trying to make things happen. They push and manipulate and scheme and worry themselves sick. And you know what? Either nothing comes, or when it does finally arrive, it comes with such difficulty and strain that it hardly feels like a victory at all. Compare that to the times in your life when things just times flowed asterisk, when the right person appeared at the right moment, when the money came from an unexpected source, easily and naturally, when the door opened before you even had to knock. What was different? It wasn't that you worked less hard necessarily, it was that you weren't attached to it. You weren't gripping it with white knuckles. You were open, expectant, but not desperate. There's a lightness to true faith. A restfulness. It's the difference between a child asking their parent for dinner, confident, assured, not even questioning whether it will come, and a beggar pleading desperately for scraps. Which approach do you think aligns with your divine inheritance? Which one acknowledges who you really are? When you truly know, that it's already done in the spiritual realm, you don't act from fear or lack, you act from inspiration. You take steps because they feel right, because you're being guided, not because you're terrified that if you don't do everything perfectly, your good will somehow slip through your fingers. You see, most people are carrying their dreams around like fragile eggs, terrified they'll drop them. They're clenched, anxious, controlling. But when you it's already yours. You carry it differently. You hold it the way you'd hold a seed that you've already planted in fertile soil. You water it? Sure, you give it sunlight. But you're not digging it up every 5 minutes to check if it's growing. You trust the process. This is where so many spiritual seekers get it wrong. They think surrender means doing nothing. They think, well, if it's already mine in the invisible, I'll just sit on my couch and wait for the universe to deliver it. No, darling. That's not faith, that's passivity. And the universe doesn't reward passivity. It rewards time's alignment asterisk. When you're truly aligned with your good, action becomes effortless. You're not pushing, you're being pulled. You're not forcing doors open. You're walking through the ones that swing open naturally. And yes, sometimes you'll be guided to do things that seem illogical, that don't make sense to the reasoning mind. The reasoning mind wants a clear map from A to Z. But Spirit works differently. Spirit says, just go to B. Trust me on this. And when you get to B, C reveals itself, and so on. I've watched this play out countless times. A woman wants a new job. She knows it's hers. She feels it. And then, out of nowhere, she's guided to attend a certain event. Maybe it seems completely unrelated. But she goes anyway because something in her says, go. And at that event, she meets someone who mentions an opening, or she overhears a conversation, or she gets an idea she never would have had sitting at home. That's divine action. That's the difference between human effort and spiritual guidance. Human effort exhausts you. Spiritual guidance energizes you. Even when you're busy, even when you're working hard, there's a lightness to it. You're not grinding your teeth. You're not sacrificing your peace. You're dancing with life, not wrestling it to the ground. You become a deliberate creator rather than a desperate chaser. There's a profound difference between these two states, and most people live their entire lives in the second category without ever knowing the first exists. The desperate chaser wakes up asking, what do I need to do today to make it happen? The deliberate creator wakes up asking, what do I get to align with today? Do you feel that shift? It's subtle, but it changes everything. One comes from lack, the other from abundance. One exhausts you by noon, the other energizes you through midnight. I've watched people run themselves into the ground trying to force doors open that were never meant for them. And I'm not saying this to discourage effort, I'm saying it to redirect it. Your effort should feel like watering a garden, not pushing a boulder uphill. If everything you do feels like that boulder, you're working against your own good, not toward it. Here's what nobody tells you about alignment. It requires you to disappoint people. It requires you to say no when everyone expects yes. It requires you to walk away from opportunities that look golden but feel wrong. This is where most people falter. They'd rather have everyone's approval than their own peace. So they keep saying yes to things that drain them, keep showing up to places their spirit has already left, keep pretending they want what they've outgrown. But your life isn't a performance for other people's comfort. It's not a museum where you display the version of yourself that makes everyone else feel safe. It's a living, breathing expression of what's true for you right now, in this moment, with all your contradictions and evolution and mess. And when you honor that, when you stop performing and start being, that's when the magic you've been chasing finally catches up to you. Because magic doesn't come to the pretender. It comes to the authentic. It comes to the one brave enough to stand in their truth, even when their truth isn't popular, even when it disappoints Aunt Susan, even when it means starting over at 47. And here's what nobody tells you about standing in your truth. It makes other people uncomfortable. Because your freedom reminds them of their cage. Your voice reminds them of their silence. Your choice to stop pretending holds up a mirror they've been avoiding for decades. I remember the moment I stopped explaining myself. A family gathering. Someone asked what I was doing these days, and I told them the truth. Not the palatable version. Not the explanation designed to make them comfortable. Just the simple, unadorned truth. The silence was deafening. And then came the questions. The concern. The barely disguised judgment, dressed up as caring. But don't you think? Have you considered? I'm just worried that. And the old me would have scrambled. Would have backtracked. Would have added qualifiers and explanations until my truth was so diluted it became acceptable again. But this time, I just smiled. I just sat there in my truth like it was the most comfortable chair in the world. Because it was. I'm happy, I said. That's it. 2 words. No justification. No defense. No explanation for why my happiness looks different than theirs. And you know what happened? Some people left. Some people stopped calling. Some people whispered to each other at the next gathering, and it hurt. I won't lie and tell you it didn't hurt. But something else happened too. Space opened up, the space where those people had been, with their expectations and their judgments, and their need for me to be smaller so they could feel bigger. That space became sacred ground. Room for my own breath. Room for my own becoming. And into that space came different people. People who met my truth with their own. People who said, me too, and I've been thinking about that, and teach me how you did that. And suddenly, I wasn't holding everything alone anymore. I wasn't pretending to be someone I wasn't. I was just being myself, speaking my truth, and the right people were showing up to meet me there. This is the paradox nobody tells you about. You think connection requires performance. You think love requires perfection. You think belonging requires contortion. But the opposite is true. Real connection happens when you stop performing. Real love begins when you show up imperfect. Real belonging arrives when you stop twisting yourself into shapes that don't fit your soul. I started noticing something else too. The people who judged my choices most harshly were the ones who were most afraid to make their own. The ones who criticized my boundaries were the ones who hadn't learned to set any. The ones who called me selfish were the ones who had martyred themselves so completely they couldn't imagine another way. This isn't meant to be cruel. It's just true. We criticize in others what we're afraid to claim for ourselves. We judge most harshly the freedom we haven't given ourselves permission to take. And here's what I learned about that criticism, that judgment, that disapproval that once terrified me so much. It wasn't actually about me at all. It was about them. It was about their fear, their pain, their unexamined choices. And I didn't need to carry that anymore. I didn't need to twist myself into knots, trying to make them comfortable with decisions that weren't theirs to make. I started practicing something radical. When someone's opinion about my life made me feel small, I asked myself one question. Is this person living a life I want to live? Are they happy? Are they free? Are they at peace? And if the answer was no, I let their opinion go. Not with anger, not with resentment, just with quiet clarity that their map wasn't mine to follow. And that's when the strangest thing happened. The moment I stopped defending my choices, they lost their power over me. The moment I stopped explaining, justifying, proving something inside me relaxed, something that had been clenched tight for years finally let go. I started noticing how much energy I'd been spending on an invisible audience. Every decision ran through a mental courtroom. Asterisk. What would they think? How would I explain this? What would I say if they asked? Asterisk. But here's what I learned. Asterisk, asterisk. The people who need explanations will never be satisfied with them. Asterisk, asterisk. You could write a dissertation on why you chose your path, complete with footnotes and citations, and they'd still find the one sentence that doesn't align with their worldview. They'd still find the hole, the inconsistency, the proof that you're making a mistake. Because they're not really listening to understand. They're listening to confirm what they already believe. I had a friend who left a prestigious law career to become a furniture maker. Beautiful, handmade pieces, each one took weeks. His family was horrified. Asterisk. You went to Yale for this? Asterisk, they'd ask, as if his degree somehow entitled them to his life choices. He tried explaining for the first year. The fulfillment, the craft, the meaning he found in working with his hands. He showed them his growing client list, his features in design magazines. Nothing satisfied them. Then one day he just stopped. Stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped showing them evidence that he was okay. He told me, I realized I was trying to get permission I'd already given myself. I kept going back for their approval, like it was something they could grant. But they can't give what I don't need. That landed in my chest and stayed there. Asterisk, asterisk. You don't need permission. You've already given yourself. Asterisk, asterisk. Read that again. Let it sink in. Every time you explain, you're unconsciously asking, asterisk, is this okay? Did I do the right thing? Please validate me. Asterisk. You're handing your power to someone who never asked for it and doesn't know what to do with it. Here's what I do now when someone questions my path. I smile. I nod. I say, I appreciate your concern. Or, I understand this doesn't make sense to you. And then, this is the crucial part. Asterisk, asterisk. I don't fill the silence that follows. I let it sit there, uncomfortable and complete. Most people don't know what to do with that. They're expecting the defense, the explanation, the essay on why you're not crazy. When you don't provide it, the conversation just ends. And you get to walk away with your energy intact. Think about what happens in your body when you refuse to react. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches. There's this moment of stillness that feels almost rebellious because you've been conditioned to believe that silence equals weakness. But it's the opposite. Silence is sovereignty. I used to think I had to defend my choices constantly. Someone would criticize my work, and I'd launch into this exhaustive explanation of my process, my reasoning, my intentions, as if their understanding was required for my validity. It never occurred to me that I could simply say nothing, that I could let their opinion exist in their world while I continued existing peacefully in mine. The turning point came during a family gathering. A relative made one of those passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. You know the type. I just worry you're making things harder for yourself. In the past, I would have spent 20 minutes justifying my path, trying to make them see. This time, I smiled and took a sip of water. Just that. The conversation moved on because I didn't give it fuel. What I realized later was profound. Their comment wasn't actually a question. It was a statement designed to pull me into their anxiety. And by not engaging, I wasn't being rude. I was simply declining an invitation to a party I never wanted to attend. Non-reaction is a muscle. The first few times you practice it, you'll feel awkward. You might even feel guilty, like you're being cold or dismissive. But watch what happens. The person who wanted to bait you will usually fill the silence themselves, or they'll move on. Either way, you're not left drained and resentful. You're not replaying the conversation in your head at 3 a.m. And here's something nobody tells you. When you stop reacting, you start noticing patterns. You see who consistently tries to provoke you. You recognize the setups before they fully form. It's like developing X-ray vision for emotional manipulation. You can see the hook coming toward you, and you can simply step aside. This doesn't mean you become emotionless or detached from life. It means you become intentional about where you invest your emotional energy. You start asking yourself, does this deserve my fire? Does this person genuinely want to understand me, or do they want to discharge their discomfort onto me? Most of the time, it's the latter. And most of the time, your non-reaction is the kindest thing you can offer both yourself and them. When you stop reacting, you begin to notice something extraordinary. The people who were most agitated by your boundaries often come back, quieter, softer. They may not apologize, though some do, but there's a shift. Your silence created a space where their own conscience could speak. You didn't have to correct them. Life did that for you. I remember a colleague who once criticized my work publicly, in front of others, with such venom that I felt my face go hot. Every instinct in me wanted to defend myself, to list all the ways she was wrong, to match her energy. But something in me said, wait. So I simply nodded and said, I appreciate your perspective, and I walked away. I didn't justify, I didn't explain. I let her words hang in the air, unsupported by my reaction. For weeks, she avoided me. And then one day, she came to my desk and said, I was too harsh that day. I was dealing with something else, and I took it out on you. She didn't make a grand apology, but the acknowledgement was enough. My non-reaction had given her the space to face herself. If I had fought back, we would have become enemies. Instead, I became a mirror. This is the spiritual principle at work. What you do not energize, you do not empower. When someone throws a complaint, a judgment, a demand at you, and you refuse to catch it, it falls back into their hands. They are forced to hold it themselves. And often, when they hold it long enough, they realize it's not even about you. It's about their own fear, their own pain, their own unmet need. But here's the practice most people miss. Non-reaction is not silent resentment. It's not swallowing your truth and pretending everything is fine. It's not passive aggression disguised as peace. True non-reaction comes from a place of inner fullness. You're not withholding your energy out of spite. You're simply choosing not to leak your power into battles that don't serve your growth. You can still speak. You can still set boundaries. But you do it from calm, not chaos. You say, I'm not available for that conversation, instead of launching into a defense. You say, I see this differently, instead of trying to convert them to your view. You offer your truth without needing them to accept it. You begin to understand that your boundaries don't require unanimous approval to be valid. They don't need a vote. They don't need consensus. Your boundary is a statement of what is, not a petition for permission. And something shifts in the atmosphere around you. When you stop arguing, people stop fighting. When you stop defending, they stop attacking. Not always, some will escalate for a time, testing the limits of this new territory, but eventually, the energy dissipates. There's nothing to push against anymore. You've simply stated a fact and moved on. I've watched this transformation countless times. The woman who spent years explaining why she couldn't host every holiday finally says, "We're staying home this year," and offers nothing more. The silence that follows isn't hostile, it's just silence, and she learns to let it be. The man who exhausted himself justifying his career choices simply stops. "This is the path I've chosen," he says, and refuses to be cross-examined about it. This is where you discover the difference between being understood and being heard. You've been chasing understanding, trying to make others see your logic, feel your feelings, walk in your shoes. But understanding requires their participation, their willingness, their interpretation. Being heard only requires that you speak your truth clearly. What they do with it afterward is their portion, not yours. You say, "I need the weekend to myself," and your friend responds with guilt or confusion or hurt. The old you would backtrack, would soften it, would twist yourself into explanations until the boundary dissolved entirely. But now you recognize that their feelings about your boundary are not evidence that your boundary is wrong. They're simply information about where your friend is in their own journey. You hold your position not with rigidity, but with quiet certainty. You can acknowledge their disappointment without absorbing it as your failure. You can witness their reaction without making it mean something about your worth. "I understand you're disappointed," you might say, "and I still need this time." Both things can be true. Their feelings can exist, and your boundary can stand. These aren't opposing forces, they're just two realities occupying the same moment. You don't need their approval to proceed. You don't need them to say, "You're right, you should protect your peace." You're not waiting for permission. You're simply informing them of a decision you've already made within yourself. This is where so many people stumble. They present a boundary as if it's up for negotiation, as if they're pitching an idea that needs buy-in. "I was thinking maybe I could, if that's okay." Would it be all right if I? No, a boundary isn't a proposal. It's a statement of fact. I won't be available for calls after 9. I need advance notice before visits. I can't take on additional projects right now. Period. Full stop. Not a question mark, a period. And here's what happens when you stop seeking approval. The people who truly care about you will adjust. They might not like it at first. They might push back, test the edges, see if you really mean it. But eventually, they'll adapt. Because real love is flexible. Real connection can withstand the introduction of boundaries. In fact, it often grows stronger because of them. The ones who can't adapt, the ones who act as if your boundary is a personal attack, they were never respecting you to begin with. They were using you. And I know that's hard to hear. I know you want to believe that everyone in your life has your best interests at heart. But sometimes, people get comfortable with your discomfort. They get used to you saying yes. They build their own stability on your instability. And when you start to set things right, when you start to reclaim your energy, it disrupts their entire system. Let them be disrupted. You are not responsible for managing other people's reactions to your self-care. Read that again. You are not responsible for managing other people's reactions to your self-care. Their disappointment, their frustration, their guilt trips, those are theirs to carry, not yours to fix. You can acknowledge their feelings without absorbing them. You can be compassionate without being complicit in your own exhaustion. I've watched people apologize for boundaries as if they've committed some terrible offense. I'm so sorry, but I just can't. Stop apologizing for taking care of yourself. Stop shrinking your needs to make room for someone else's wants. Your well-being is not an inconvenience. It's not something to feel guilty about. It's the foundation upon which everything else in your life is built. When you protect your energy, when you honor your boundaries, when you say no to what depletes you, you're not being selfish. You're being responsible. You're being a good steward of the life you've been given. And here's what I've discovered. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries. They might not understand them at first. They might push back a little. But if they genuinely care about your well-being, they will adjust. They will honor your needs. The people who guilt you, who manipulate you, who make you feel bad for taking care of yourself, those people are revealing something important about themselves. They're showing you that they value what you can do for them more than who you are as a person. And that's hard to see. It's painful to recognize. But it's also incredibly freeing, because once you see it, you can make different choices. Let me share something with you. I once knew someone who was constantly exhausted, constantly overwhelmed, constantly on the verge of burnout. She would say yes to everything, agree to every request, show up for everyone else while neglecting herself completely. One day, she hit a wall. Her body literally forced her to stop. She got sick, really sick, and had to take months off work. And you know what she told me? She said it was the best thing that ever happened to her. Not because being sick was good, but because it gave her permission to stop. It forced her to establish boundaries she'd been too afraid to set on her own. And during that recovery period, she discovered something shocking. The world didn't fall apart without her constant sacrificing. Her relationships didn't crumble. Her career didn't end. Instead, something different happened. The people who really mattered stepped up. They supported her, they respected her boundaries, and the people who'd been using her gradually faded away. She rebuilt her life from a foundation of self-respect rather than self-sacrifice. And she became happier, healthier, and more successful than she'd ever been before. You don't have to wait for your body to force you to stop. You can make that choice right now. You can decide that your well-being matters, that your peace matters, that your energy is precious and worthy of protection. You can decide that your well-being matters, that your peace matters, that your energy is precious and worthy of protection. And here's what I've learned. The moment you truly decide this, not just wish for it, but decide with that deep, unwavering knowing, everything begins to shift. The universe responds to your decision. It always does, because your faith, your conviction, activates the law. Your word becomes flesh. Your decision becomes your demonstration. I've watched people transform their entire lives simply by deciding they were worthy of peace. Not by fighting, not by forcing, but by deciding and then aligning their actions with that decision. They stopped answering calls from people who drained them. They started saying no without elaborate explanations. They walked away from situations that once would have kept them trapped for months or years. And you know what happened? Space opened up. Beautiful, breathing space. Room for joy to enter. Room for genuine connection. Room for opportunities that were always there, but couldn't reach them through the wall of toxic entanglements. This is how the law works. Nature abhors a vacuum. When you clear out what doesn't belong, when you release what was never meant for you, something better rushes in to fill that space. Always. Without exception. But you must create the opening. You must do your part. Now, I want to speak to those of you who are thinking, but I've tried setting boundaries. It didn't work. They didn't respect them. Listen carefully. Boundaries aren't about controlling other people's behavior. You cannot control what others do. That's their kingdom, their dominion. Boundaries are about what you will and will not accept. What you will and will not participate in. What you will and will not tolerate in your space, in your life, in your energy field. When someone crosses a boundary, the boundary hasn't failed. The boundary is simply showing you what action is now required. Maybe it's time to increase the distance. Maybe it's time to end the relationship entirely. Maybe it's time to get support, to ask for help, to involve others. The boundary is information. It's guidance. It's showing you where your next right action lies. And here's the beautiful part: when you honor the boundary, when you take that right action, something shifts in the spiritual realm. The universe responds, not because you've earned it through struggle, but because you've aligned yourself with divine order. I've watched this happen over and over. A woman finally tells her sister, "I can't lend you money anymore. I love you, but I need to take care of my own family first." And within weeks, sometimes days, an unexpected check arrives. A forgotten refund. A small inheritance from a distant relative. The universe was waiting for her to stop the leak in her own vessel before it could pour more in. A man sets boundaries around his work hours, stops answering emails at midnight, stops sacrificing his health on the altar of productivity. And suddenly, he gets the promotion. The very thing he thought required endless availability came to him when he declared his own worth. This isn't coincidence. This is law. When you set a boundary, you're making a declaration to the universe. I know my value. I trust divine supply. I will not operate from fear and depletion. And the universe always honors that declaration. But here's where people get tripped up. They set the boundary, and then they white-knuckle through the aftermath. They're terrified. They're waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the person to leave, for the opportunity to vanish. And that fear? It's just the old pattern trying to reassert itself. You've got to hold steady. You've got to trust that what's meant for you will not pass you by. If someone leaves because you set a boundary, they were never your person. If an opportunity disappears because you honored yourself, it was never your opportunity. The universe doesn't take away what's truly yours. I remember a woman who worked for a demanding boss. He'd call her at all hours, expect her to cancel personal plans, belittled her in meetings. She was miserable but terrified. To speak up, she needed the job. She had bills, she had responsibilities. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She went to him and said, calmly and clearly, "I need to discuss some changes to how we work together." She outlined what she would and wouldn't do. No drama, no apologies, just clarity. She fully expected to be fired. Instead, he looked at her with something like respect and said, "Fair enough." That moment became a turning point in her career. Not because she got what she wanted, she didn't, not immediately, but because she stopped playing a role and started showing up as herself. And here's what nobody tells you about authenticity. It doesn't always get you applause. Sometimes it gets you silence. Sometimes it gets you judgment. But it always gets you alignment. The universe cannot send you what's meant for you when you're pretending to be someone else. It's like ordering a package to the wrong address and then wondering why it never arrives. I've watched this principle play out in relationships too. A woman came to me once, exhausted from trying to be the cool girlfriend. She laughed at jokes she didn't find funny. She pretended to love camping when she hated bugs. She made herself small so he wouldn't feel threatened. And then she wondered why he never really saw her. "He doesn't love me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "How could he?" I asked gently. "You haven't shown him who you are." She looked stunned. like I'd slapped her. But then, something shifted, in her eyes recognition, maybe, or relief. Within 3 months, she'd stopped performing. And yes, that relationship ended. But 6 months after that, she met someone who loved her actual laugh, her actual boundaries, her actual self. Not because she'd become more lovable, but because she'd become more honest. This is what we get wrong about manifestation. We think we need to become perfect to attract what we want. We think we need to have it all figured out, have our lives polished and presentable, so we wait. We perform. We hide the mess and show only the highlight reel. But the universe doesn't respond to your performance. It responds to your frequency. And your frequency is most powerful when it's authentically yours. I'm not saying you shouldn't grow or improve. Growth is beautiful. But there's a difference between growing into who you truly are and contorting yourself into who you think you should be. One feels like expansion. The other feels like suffocation. I've watched people spend decades in careers that looked perfect on paper, chasing titles that sounded impressive to everyone except themselves. They hit every milestone. They exceeded every expectation. And with each achievement, they felt a little more hollow inside. That's not growth. That's erosion, wearing away at your soul one compromise at a time. Here's what nobody tells you about authenticity. It doesn't mean staying exactly who you were at 20. It means honoring who you're becoming, even when that person looks nothing like who you planned to be. I've seen someone walk away from a prestigious law career to teach pottery. I've watched a corporate executive realize their true calling was working with animals. These weren't failures. These were people brave enough to let their authentic selves breathe. The universe doesn't reward the version of you that looks good in other people's stories. It rewards the version that's true. And here's the paradox. When you stop performing authenticity and start living it, opportunities that were never available to the manufactured version of you suddenly appear. Doors open not because you've become what others wanted, but because you've become magnetically, undeniably yourself. This means you might disappoint some people. You probably will. The friends who loved your stability won't understand your sudden need for adventure. The family who celebrated your predictability will be confused by your transformation. And that's okay. Their discomfort is not your compass. Your inner knowing is. I'm not saying throw everything away on a whim. I'm saying listen to the whispers before they become screams. Pay attention to what drains you and what energizes you. Notice which parts of your life require you to put on a mask and which allow you to simply be. The exhaustion you feel isn't always about working too hard. Sometimes, it's about working too hard at being someone you're not. True growth feels like coming home to yourself, not like running away from who you are. It feels like expansion, possibility, alignment. If your version of self-improvement feels like self-abandonment, you're following the wrong map. Stop trying to upgrade yourself and start remembering yourself. The person you're meant to be isn't somewhere out there waiting to be built. They're in here, waiting to be freed. You've been living with the emergency brake on, wondering why you're not moving forward. And the brake isn't fear or laziness or bad habits. The brake is the belief that you need fixing. Every morning, you wake up and immediately start auditing yourself. What's wrong today? What needs improvement? What am I still not good enough at? You treat yourself like a broken machine that needs constant maintenance. And then you wonder why you feel exhausted before the day even begins. I'm going to tell you something that might shake you. Nothing about you needs fixing. Nothing. The core of who you are, that essential spark, that consciousness, reading these words right now, it was never broken. It was never insufficient. It was never too much or too little. What needs addressing isn't you. It's the accumulated layers of conditioning, the borrowed beliefs, the inherited fears, the adopted limitations. Those aren't you. Those are things you picked up along the way, like dust on a mirror. The mirror doesn't need fixing. It needs cleaning. You know what happens when you finally understand this? You stop approaching your life like a renovation project and start approaching it like an excavation. You stop asking, what do I need to become? And start asking, what have I been pretending not to be? Because here's what they never tell you in all those self-improvement courses. The person you admire, the person you dream of becoming, the version of yourself you see in your highest moments, that's not a future possibility. That's a current reality you keep talking yourself out of. Every single quality you wish you had, you've already demonstrated. Every strength you're trying to develop, you've already expressed. You just did it briefly, then immediately dismissed it as a fluke, an accident, not the real you. You experienced a moment of genuine confidence and called it fake. You felt natural joy and called it temporary. You expressed authentic power and called it a lucky break. Stop disowning your moments of truth and claiming your moments of fear as your identity. Your fear has been running a protection racket in your mind. It charges you everything, your dreams, your joy, your natural expression, and promises safety in return. But look around at what this safety has cost you. You're protected from nothing except the life you came here to live. I watch people treat their anxiety like a trusted advisor, their doubt like an oracle, their worry like wisdom. They consult their fear before every decision, give it veto power over every impulse toward joy, let it design their entire existence around what might go wrong. And they wonder why life feels like walking through fog, not because the path isn't clear, but because they've made a companion of the very thing that obscures it. You were never meant to live in constant negotiation with your terror. The soul doesn't hedge its bets. It doesn't say, I'll express half of what I am and see if the universe approves. It doesn't ration out its light in case there's a shortage. Your essential nature is not careful. It's not cautious. It's not concerned with whether other people understand it. I've seen what happens when someone stops consulting fear before speaking. Their voice changes first. It drops into a different register, one that doesn't ask permission or apologize for taking up space. Then their body changes, the shoulders drop, the breath deepens. The chronic tension that shaped itself around years of self-suppression begins to release. And finally, their life changes not because they suddenly become perfect or fearless, but because they stop treating fear like it has information about who they really are. The truth is this: your fear knows nothing about your capacity. It has no data on what you can actually handle, create, or become. It's been making predictions based on who you were at 7 years old, catastrophizing based on that one time something went wrong, building elaborate scenarios to protect you from possibilities it doesn't understand. You've been taking strategic life advice from the part of you that thinks every unknown is a threat and every risk is a referendum on your worth. What if you fired that advisor? Not through some violent rejection, but through simple recognition. This voice that sounds so authoritative is actually just afraid. It's doing its best with limited information. You can thank it for trying to keep you safe and then make decisions anyway. Because here's what's wild: those decisions don't have to be perfect. They don't even have to be particularly wise in the beginning. They just have to be times yours asterisk. Made from desire rather than fear. Made from curiosity rather than obligation. I started saying yes to invitations that genuinely excited me, even when I couldn't explain why. Coffee with that person, my inner critic dismissed as flaky. The workshop that seemed impractical. The conversation that had no networking value whatsoever. And you know what happened? Nothing catastrophic. The world didn't end. My career didn't implode. Instead, something shifted. I started feeling more times, present times, in my own life. Like I'd been watching everything through a screen and suddenly stepped into the room. The inner critic hated this, of course. It ramped up the commentary, got more creative with the warnings. But here's the thing: when you start taking action from desire rather than fear, the critic's voice starts to sound smaller. Not gone, but less convincing. Like a radio station you're slowly tuning away from. You begin to notice that most of its predictions don't come true. The disaster it forecasted was actually just an awkward moment that everyone forgot about in 10 minutes. The humiliation was actually just being human in public. The career-ending mistake was barely noticed by anyone but you. And gradually, you start building evidence against the critic's worldview. A tiny catalog of times when you trusted yourself and it worked out. Moments when you were imperfect and people still liked you. Conversations where you were honest and it deepened the connection instead of destroying it. This is what I mean by starving the critic, not through force, but through withdrawal of attention. You stop feeding it with your belief. You stop treating its thoughts as facts that must be analyzed and defended against. You start seeing them as what they are: nervous mental chatter that doesn't deserve the authority you've been giving it. The critic will still show up, that's fine, but it no longer gets to be the primary voice in your decision-making process. It becomes one voice among many, usually the loudest, sure, but not the most trustworthy. The mind that doubts will always find evidence to support the doubt. The mind that believes will always find evidence to support the belief. This is not philosophy. This is how consciousness creates reality. I once worked with a woman who wanted to change careers. She'd been in accounting for 15 years and felt called toward teaching. Every time she considered making the shift, her mind would flood her with what seemed like reasonable concerns. You're too old to start over. Teachers make less money. You don't have the right degree. The education system is broken anyway. What if you fail? Each concern sounded legitimate. They weren't crazy thoughts. But here's what I helped her see. Those thoughts weren't protecting her. They were preserving her current reality. The mind doesn't distinguish between what's good for you and what's familiar to you. It simply defends the known. When she began to recognize these thoughts as the mind doing its job rather than delivering prophecy, everything shifted. She could hear the concern and say, "Thank you for sharing. I'm doing this anyway." She enrolled in a teaching certification program. The fears didn't disappear, they got louder, but they no longer controlled the outcome. Within 2 years, she was teaching middle school English. She made less money on paper. She also came alive in a way I'd never seen. The mind had been wrong about what would make her happy, catastrophically wrong, but it had been very confident. Your mind is confident about a lot of things that aren't true. It's confident you can't do that thing you've been dreaming about. It's confident that person will reject you. It's confident the past will repeat itself. And it presents these confidences as facts. But confidence is not the same as truth. The mind is simply running patterns based on old data. It's using what happened before to predict what will happen next. This works beautifully for routine tasks. This works terribly for transformation. Every new thing you've ever done required you to act in spite of what your mind insisted was true. Every growth moment in your life happened when you stopped listening to the voice that said you can't, and started listening to the voice that whispered, "But what if you could?" The voice of limitation is the loudest voice in your head, but it's never been the truest one. Think about the first time you drove a car. Your mind screamed that you couldn't possibly coordinate the pedals, the wheel, the mirrors, the speed, all at once. It felt impossible. And yet, within weeks, you were doing it without thinking. Your mind's assessment of impossibility was completely wrong. Or consider the first time you spoke in public, or started a new job, or moved to a new city. Before each of those experiences, your mind generated 1,000 reasons why it wouldn't work, why you'd fail, why you should stay exactly where you were. And if you had believed that voice completely, you'd still be exactly where you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The transformative moments of your life have one thing in common. They all required you to disbelieve the narrative your mind was feeding you. They required you to act as if a different reality were possible, even when you had no evidence for it. You had to become the person before you felt like the person. You had to do the thing before you believed you could do the thing. This is why trying to think your way into a new identity never works. You can't logic yourself into confidence. You can't analyze yourself into courage. You can't meditate yourself into capability. These qualities emerge through action, not contemplation. Your mind will always lag behind your behavior. It's designed that way. It takes repeated evidence before your mind updates its model of who you are. One workout doesn't make you athletic in your mind's eyes. One conversation doesn't make you confident. One act of courage doesn't make you brave. But 10 workouts start to shift something. 20 conversations create momentum. 30 acts of courage begin to rewrite the story. You're not waiting for your mind to give you permission. You're giving your mind new data until it has no choice but to update its conclusions about you. You're creating evidence that contradicts the old story so consistently that the old story becomes untenable. This is the practice of consciousness. This is how transformation actually occurs. Not in a single moment of revelation, but in the patient, persistent revision of what you believe to be true about yourself. And here's what makes this so powerful. Your mind doesn't distinguish between what you've imagined vividly and what you've experienced physically. The neural pathways don't care whether the evidence came from external circumstances or internal repetition. When you rehearse a new identity in your imagination with enough consistency and feeling, your brain begins to treat it as memory. It becomes part of your lived experience, even before the outer world has confirmed it. This is why I can tell someone who has never known abundance to begin speaking as though wealth is their natural state. Not as pretense, not as denial, but as practice. You are training yourself into a new vibration. You are becoming fluent in a language your mind has never spoken before. The resistance you feel is not proof that it isn't working. The resistance is proof that you are touching something real. You are approaching the boundary where the old self ends and the new self begins, and every part of you that has been invested in the old identity will fight to maintain itself. This is normal. This is expected. This is not a reason to stop. You keep going. You keep affirming. You keep visualizing. You keep speaking. Not because you've seen results yet, but because you understand that the results are the last thing to arrive. Everything else comes first. The shift in perception, the new neural patterns, the updated beliefs, the changed vibration. The results are simply the material confirmation of work that has already been completed internally. So when you don't see evidence yet, you don't waver. You don't say, well, I tried, and it didn't work. You say, the outer world is still catching up to the inner change I've already made. And you continue. This is faith. Not blind belief, not wishful thinking, but the disciplined practice of holding a vision until it materializes. It is the understanding that you are working with law, not magic. The law requires consistency. It requires persistence. It requires that you become the thing you desire before the desire can find you. Many of you declare your intentions once, twice, perhaps a dozen times, and then wonder why the universe has not rushed to meet you. But let me ask you this. If you were planting a garden, would you scatter seeds upon the ground and then abandon them? Would you water them one day and forget them the next? Would you speak words of life over them in the morning and curse them by evening? Of course not. You would tend them daily. You would create the conditions for growth. You would act as though the harvest were already assured, because you understand that the seed contains within itself the pattern of the full-grown plant. Your words are seeds. Your thoughts are seeds. Your declarations are seeds planted in the invisible substance that surrounds you. But seeds require cultivation. They require the steady faith of the gardener who knows that beneath the soil, unseen forces are already at work. I once knew a woman who desired freedom from a considerable debt. She spoke her word once, I am free from all financial burden, and then immediately returned to her old conversation. Within the hour, she was telling her neighbor about how impossible her situation was, how the creditors were closing in, how she saw no way out. She had planted a seed and then trampled it underfoot. When I reminded her of the law, she said to me, "But Florence, I did declare it. I said the words." And I replied, "Yes, you said the words. But you did not become the words. You wore your declaration like a costume for a moment, and then discarded it for your familiar rags of limitation." This is where so many stumble. They believe that speaking a truth once should be sufficient, that the law should accommodate their inconsistency. But the law is impersonal. It responds not to your occasional affirmations, but to your habitual consciousness. It mirrors back to you, not what you said in one inspired moment, but what you have become in your inner conversation, in the silent dialogue that runs beneath your waking hours. You must become relentless in your new assumption. Not harsh, not forced, but relentless in the way water is relentless as it shapes stone, gentle, persistent, unwavering. You must catch yourself each time you slip back into the old state and redirect your attention, again and again, until the new state becomes more natural than the old. This is the discipline that transforms. This is the persistence that moves mountains. Most people give up too soon. They practice the new state for a day or two, maybe a week, and when they don't see immediate results, they abandon it and return to their old dwelling place. But beloved, a state is not a costume you try on for an afternoon. It is a home you must fully move into, unpacking every box, hanging every picture, until you know every corner by heart. I remember a woman who came to me desperate to manifest prosperity. She had been living in poverty for years, and it had become so familiar to her that it felt like her only reality. I instructed her to assume the feeling of wealth, to walk through her days as though abundance was already her natural condition. For 3 days, she did exactly as I said. She felt prosperous. She thought prosperous thoughts. She spoke prosperous words. On the 4th day, she received an unexpected bill. Immediately, all her old panic returned. She called me in distress, saying, "You see, it doesn't work." I tried to feel wealthy, and all that came was more lack. I said to her, "My dear, you did not try to feel wealthy. You visited wealth as a tourist, but you still live in poverty. The moment a test came, you ran straight back to your old dwelling place because that is where you still keep all your belongings. This is where most people falter. They want the new state to prove itself before they commit to it. But the law does not work that way. You must commit first. You must move in completely, burn the bridges to your old state, and refuse to return no matter what appearances suggest. The outer world is always the last to know. It reflects back to you the state you truly occupy, not the one you occasionally visit. The mistake most people make is they treat their new state like a vacation home instead of their permanent residence. They visit it when they feel inspired, when circumstances look promising, when others validate their choice. But the moment doubt whispers or evidence contradicts, they pack their bags and rush back to the familiar territory of limitation. I want you to understand something crucial. The universe doesn't respond to your wishes, your hopes, or your occasional positive thoughts. It responds to the state you inhabit most consistently, the identity you wear like skin, not like a costume you put on for special occasions. When I inhabited my old state, I would catch myself saying things like, "I'm trying to be more abundant," or "I'm working on feeling worthy." Do you hear the contradiction in those statements? You cannot try to be what you already are. You cannot work toward a state you must occupy now. Those phrases betrayed that I was still living in lack, just thinking about abundance. I was a tourist in the land of my desires, not a citizen. The shift happened when I stopped asking, "How do I get there?" and started asking, "Who am I being right now?" Because you're always being someone. You're always in a state. The question is whether you're consciously choosing it or unconsciously defaulting to old patterns. Let me be direct. Your emotions are not obstacles to overcome. They are the very substance of your state. When you feel wealthy, you are wealthy in consciousness. When you feel loved, you are loved in consciousness. When you feel free, you are free in consciousness. And consciousness is the only reality. Everything else is shadow and echo. This is why forcing yourself to feel differently never works. You cannot whip yourself into a new state through willpower alone. What you can do is recognize that you have permission to choose your state right now, regardless of external proof. You don't need anyone's approval. You don't need the bank account first. You don't need the relationship to materialize. You simply claim the state as yours because you say so. And here's what I've watched unfold time and time again. The moment you stop negotiating with your imagination, reality stops negotiating with you. The woman who decided she was cherished didn't wait for flowers to arrive. She bought herself flowers. She wore the dress. She walked like someone deeply loved. And within weeks, her husband, who hadn't noticed her in months, started leaving notes on her pillow. The man who claimed he was prosperous stopped checking his bank balance obsessively. He tithed. He tipped generously. He acted from abundance, not toward it, and opportunities he'd been chasing for years suddenly appeared without effort. You see, assumption doesn't attract. Assumption becomes. When you assume something is true, you don't look for it anymore. You don't strain, you don't scheme. You simply live from that truth, and the world reorganizes itself to match your inner conviction. This is why Jesus said, "Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." Received. Past tense. Done. Finished. Not will receive. Not might receive if you're good enough. Have received. The assumption of the wish fulfilled isn't hope. It's certainty. It's the knowledge that in the dimension where all things already exist, your desire is already done. Your job isn't to make it happen. Your job is to accept it as fact. And I know what you're thinking, but that feels like lying to myself. Good. Let it feel that way. Because what you call lying to yourself is actually telling yourself the truth that hasn't materialized yet. Every invention began as a lie. Every achievement started as a fantasy. Every love story was once just imagination. The difference between people who manifest and people who don't isn't talent, luck, or worthiness. It's the willingness to believe the invisible before it becomes visible, to feel the wealth before the deposit clears, to feel the love before the person appears, to feel the health before the symptoms vanish. This is the art of assumption, and it requires no permission, no credentials, No external validation. You simply decide, this is who I am now, and you let the world catch up. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for someone to anoint them, to tell them they're ready, to grant them permission to be great. But here's what they never understand. That person never comes. That authority doesn't exist outside of you. I've watched people with extraordinary gifts die with their music still inside them, not because they lacked talent, but because they were waiting for a permission slip that was never going to arrive. The universe doesn't send you a certificate of worthiness. Life doesn't hand you a diploma that says you're now qualified to pursue your dreams. The only permission you will ever receive is the permission you give yourself. And here's the beautiful part. The moment you stop waiting, the moment you simply begin, as if you already have permission, the world rearranges itself around your decision. Opportunities that were invisible suddenly become obvious. Doors that seemed locked swing open at your touch. People who never noticed you suddenly want to know your story. This isn't magic, it's physics. It's the natural law of consciousness manifesting in form. When you change who you believe yourself to be, you change what you can perceive and therefore what you can access. Your identity determines your reality more powerfully than any external circumstance ever could. I knew a woman who wanted to be a writer for 20 years but never wrote because she didn't have an MFA, didn't know the right people, wasn't part of the literary world. She was waiting for someone to discover her, to invite her to the table. One day, exhausted by her own excuses, she simply started writing. Not for publication, not for approval, just because she decided she was a writer, and that's what writers do. Within a year, her work had been published in 3 major magazines. Within 2 years, she had a book deal. Nothing about her external circumstances had changed. She didn't get a degree or make a connection. She simply stopped waiting for permission and started living from the identity she wanted to claim. The world responds to who you are being, not who you hope to become someday. It reflects back the energy you put out. When you show up as someone still seeking validation, you get more circumstances that require you to seek validation. When you show up as someone who is already complete, already worthy, already claiming their place, the world treats you accordingly. This is the great secret they don't teach you. You don't earn the right to be yourself. You already have it. You've always had it. You've been walking around with the master key in your pocket, asking everyone if they've seen your keys. And this is where the real transformation begins. Not when you finally achieve something, not when someone validates you, not when you reach some imaginary finish line. It begins the moment you stop asking for permission to be who you are. I watch people spend decades preparing to live. They're getting ready to be confident. They're working on being worthy. They're training to be free. And all that preparation? It's just another form of postponement. You cannot practice being yourself. You can only be yourself. And here's what happens when you finally make that shift. The world doesn't end. That's the shocking part. All those consequences you were terrified of, most of them never materialize. And the ones that do, they're usually the best things that ever happened to you. The job you lose because you stopped pretending, it was suffocating you anyway. The relationship that ends because you finally speak your truth, it was built on a foundation of lies. The friends who disappear when you stop performing, they were never really seeing you in the first place. What you think of as loss is actually liberation. I had a student who spent 15 years in a career that made her miserable. Everyone told her she was crazy to leave. She had the degree, the reputation, the retirement plan. But every morning, she put on a costume metaphorically and literally and pretended to be someone she wasn't. One day, she just stopped. No dramatic exit, no manifesto. She just quietly withdrew her energy from the performance. Within 6 months, she'd started the small business she'd been dreaming about for years. Within a year, she was making more money than she ever had. But the money wasn't even the point. The point was that she could finally breathe. She said something I'll never forget. I spent all those years afraid of falling, not realizing I was already on the ground. Most of us are already on the ground, friends. We've already fallen. We just haven't admitted it yet. We're lying there, pretending we're still standing, exhausted from maintaining the illusion. The question isn't whether you can afford to be yourself. The question is, how much longer can you afford not to be?